There you go. Very good. So welcome everyone. As you know, part of what we try to do, among each and every congregation, but also together as partners in fostering Judaism, Jewish knowledge and literacy, given the fact that death penalty is one of those issues that is debated all across the country, but certainly here in Tennessee. The idea came to maybe bring ourselves together and study some of the basic Jewish texts regarding the idea of death penalty and how Judaism decided to deal with the idea of the death penalty. So we will do two classes today and next Wednesday. The idea for this class that, I'll be in charge of showing some of the texts, but all of us will be invited to have a conversation around those texts, is to try to cover, if we can, both what's going on in the Bible, in the Torah, in the Tanakh, and then in the Talmudic times. Okay, that will set the foundations for next week when rabbis Lori and Shayna will take it from here. Okay, I will begin by sharing my screen. And are you ready to begin? I hope you are. So share screen. Very good. Do you see the? Okay, the beautiful thing about having two screens is I can see you both and the PowerPoint. So don't hide, so I can see if you are listening to me or not. Okay, Judaism and the death penalty. Let us begin by saying that in biblical times, death penalty happens. Okay, if you open the Bible, there are a bunch of reasons that we will have a conversation in just a moment. There are multiple reasons that will get you the death penalty. Okay, it's basically the three ways that we can find in the Torah are stoning, burning, and hanging, with stoning being the most used death penalty at the time of the Bible. Okay, so stoning was the instinctive, violent expression of popular wrath, which means that when this would happen, the people will come together and will be part of the execution of the penalty. The execution was not kind of given away to somebody, the executor that will do the dirty job. Everyone had to become part of this ritualized punishment. And so it included the active participation of the whole people. Back in the day, probably, and this is interesting just to compare on how the rabbis will keep the category of stoning, but will understand it completely different. Back in the Bible, the stoning is what you are probably thinking. You put somebody in the middle, and then you throw rocks at the guy until, or the gal, until the person dies. Okay, not a very painless way of killing somebody. Now, the other two are burning. Burning in the Torah shows up for only two cases. So the majority of the times we are talking about the stoning as the way of dealing with all sorts of things. But burning happens in the Torah. And then, according to some texts, there was a moment in which some bodies would be burned after the execution. Okay, it doesn't happen for everyone, but there are certain specific cases that invite the burning of a body that was already stoned to death. The last one, hanging, is also something that actually happened only after the execution and only for a couple of offenses. And in any case, according to what we learn in the Torah, you have to take that body down from the tree before night. And we will talk actually about that because it sheds some light into what's going on in this very tricky conversation. Now, these are the, almost everything you can get killed for. Okay, so a couple of those, it's like kidnapping, murdering, raping, whatever. Okay, there are a couple of reasons that are connected to sexuality, like bestiality or incestuous relations that we are reading in this week's Torah portion. Or again, it's like male homosexuality. Interestingly enough, by the way, as a footnote, there is no comment on female homosexuality in the Bible. So it's again not for today, but it's an interesting conversation for another time. But then you get to be stoned for Shabbat breaking, or if you ever say something wrong to your parents, or all sorts of things that will probably make the Jewish people to be already extinct many, many, many years ago. So if we would keep all of these things, I never cursed my parents. I know that you never cursed your parents, but in terms of odds, it's not on our, it's pretty much against us. Okay. The point is that actually, if you go and look at the different list and the different punishments, you will see that the Bible doesn't, for example, have a whole lot of room for incarceration. Again, not something for today, but it's an interesting segue to speak about other subjects of concern. Okay, incarceration doesn't show up much in the Bible as a punishment. You get lashes, you get stoned, you get a fine, economic fine, but you never get jail. Okay, the only one that gets jail, or not the only one, but one of the few that will get jail is Joseph, and it's not under Jewish law. So remember Joseph in the jail, with the copper and whatever. We don't see much jail as a punishment back in the day. Okay, now why do we do this? Why the Torah pushes for this type of punishment against all these type of things that are basically on the big three no-nos: idolatry, incestuous relationships, and the killing, or the shfichut damim, as we say in Hebrew, the moment you draw blood from somebody else. What's going on here? What's the problem? What's the why the Torah wants all of these to be out? As we read in multiple parts, mostly in the book of Deuteronomy, next to many of these death penalties, the Torah says, "Ubiarta ara mekirbecha." You need to sweep out the evil from your midst. What's the reason behind the call to punish all these folks with the capital punishment? The point is that by doing that, you will be taking away the ra, like the it's the evil from your midst. Okay, so it's like you uproot the evil from its root. Uproot the evil and you take it away, mikirbecha. Okay, you take it away from you. Okay, and yet, and this is part of the conversation that I want us to see, and I want to begin the conversation because this is what will move us eventually into the world of the rabbis. We have the crime, we have the punishment, we have the idea of sweeping out the evil from our midst. And yet, there are other voices out there who are saying all sorts of things. So, for example, in the book of Deuteronomy, we read the following: if a man is guilty of a capital offense and is put to death, and you impale him on a stake, this is what we called before hanging, You must not let his corpse remain on the stake overnight, but must bury him the same day. For an impaled body is an affront to God. You shall not defile the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. And I actually want to ask you a question at this point. Okay, we have here somebody who has been executed because of a capital offense. And yet, there is some requirement to treat this person with dignity. Why? For an impaled body is an affront to God. And my question to you is, why? What's going on here? Why do you think that the Torah is telling us that you cannot let that body hanging from a tree forever and ever, even if that person deserved capital punishment? What does it mean for an impaled body is an affront to God? In which way? Any takes? Rick?
I think that God gives us the body and the soul, and that's on loan to us. And it's his, not ours. And that we have to be aware of that and that treat it with respect.
Okay, nice, nice. It's like, you know, the body doesn't belong to us. Yeah, who else? Kitty. We don't hear you, Kitty. I know that you are unmuted, but maybe your microphone is not working. Happens in the Zoom universe. Yeah, we hear you with a very squeaky voice of wee, 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 wee. Sorry. Do you want to type that on the chat? In the meantime, anyone else? Yes, Judy sucks. You need to unmute. Judy, you need to unmute.
Basically, we're all children of God, and as such, no matter what we've done, we are still to be afforded the dignity of all of God's children, and that would be a speedy burial.
Nice. So it's like even somebody who has been punished with the capital offense, you know, somebody that we put to die, you know, with the death penalty, has the dignity of somebody who is created in the image of God. Okay. Susan asks if this is going back to Cain. There is no contact here, but the rabbis will make some contacts, and we will come back to that. And so Kitty says, but Linda says it's not a kosher death. The question would be, what would be a kosher death? And Kitty says, we are made in the image of God and don't want that image to become disgusting. And there is something there. So hold on to that thought, because I want us to read the commentary from Rashi, who is quoting from previous texts. And so this is what Rashi, very famous French commentator, has to say, actually quoting from the Talmud. This is a degradation of the divine king, for man is made in his image and the Israelites are his children. And so he tells a parable. It may be compared to the case of two twin brothers who very closely resembled each other. One became king and the other was arrested for robbery and was hanged. Whoever saw him on the gallows thought that the king was hanged. So I want, you know, what are your reactions to this parable that Rashi is quoting from the Talmud? What are the implications of what Rashi is saying in the context of the death penalty, the affront to God, and how we make sense of all this? Harriet?
It makes me think a little bit about gossip and how gossip doesn't just hurt the person saying it, but also the person hearing it and really everybody else. So it's also, I mean, this seems to also say, you know, it's the person who sees it that it's a problem for, not just who it's happened to.
So on one end, there is a problem with the person who is seeing the guy who's hanged and doesn't understand what's going on and can actually assume the wrong assumptions. He may think that the one who is hanging is the king, who happened to be a good guy, not a bad guy. And that could create a whole lot of noise. Any other takes? Rabbis, you are invited at any point, but Nanette.
Yeah, perhaps it has to do with whose law is whose. For me, the capital punishment is man's law, whereby the other about with the image of, being in the image of God is more God's law. So for me, there's a differential.
Interesting. Thank you. Anyone else?
Rabbi,
Yes, Lorna and Ruth.
so when the one about they had to be buried that night,
Yes.
doesn't that give affirmation to the fact that additional affirmation to the fact that the Jews clearly didn't kill Jesus?
Well, there is something there. And the truth is that when you analyze Talmudic texts later, you will see that, for example, capital punishment cases were never held at night, which is in direct contradiction to what the New Testament says. The question is, what came first? The rabbis trying to make sure that no trial happens at night, or the New Testament pointing that happened that way. In any case, the Talmud does a whole lot of things to make sure that it's very clear that we didn't kill Jesus. Crucifixion is not one of the kosher ways of capital punishment in the Jewish tradition, for example. And there are a bunch of things that would render this impossible. And even the Talmud says that 40 years before the destruction of the Second Temple, the Jews didn't do any capital punishment. Okay. Now, when was the Second Temple of Jerusalem destroyed? In which year? Do you remember?
70.
70 minus 40 gives us, right before the guy got crucified, we were not already in the business of killing anybody. Okay, so the Talmud looks for ways to move away, and maybe it's part of that conversation. Ruth.
Okay, there are two issues that I see here. First of all, are we as humans absolved of guilt in rendering the punishment of the death penalty based on how we perceive the conditions that it takes to make that decision? The second is that no, it's a little harder to say, but isn't it awfully traumatic for some people because they don't necessarily agree with the decision to put someone to death? Like, say you've got a thief, but they might have a daughter or a wife or somebody that loves that person that is completely traumatized by the event, as of course happens with the death penalty.
Mm-hmm. I think that you're pointing at some of the things that we will see later with the rabbis, okay? Which,
yes.
We have the death penalty. It's out there.
Shut up.
What? Sally?
Rabbi?
Yes, who's talking?
Oh, Paul Barnett.
Paul, yes.
I recognize, that there are some crimes that are so heinous that somebody probably should not be allowed to live. However, it's hardly a week that goes by that you don't read in the paper somebody who's been on death row who has been proved to be innocent. And I think I read somewhere, thou shalt not kill. And I think it's just an unforgivable crime to kill somebody who is innocent. And so I am totally against the death penalty.
And hold on to that same, thought that you just shared with us, because the last slide for today will actually resonate with what you just said and agree, okay? It's like part of the journey today. First is to present that Judaism in its very basic texts allows for different types of death penalty. And yet, even if that is allowed, what we will see in just a moment with the texts from the rabbis are that type of how to say, the detention. Okay, this is something that is out there. There are some crimes that are terrible, and yet what happens with the family, what happens with whether that person is innocent, or all sorts of things. And some of that comes here. I think that what Rashi is trying to point by quoting the Talmud is that, remember, we were created in God's image. When our body is defiled, God's image is defiled. And here there is something else, because if you can connect these two twins, which is an interesting relationship between God and humanity, and you can, it looks like the king can be embarrassed by what happened here. So it's like, even if you are pushed to do this, let's make, I don't know who's, give me a second. There you go. So even if this is something that we need to do, you should bury that person soon enough, because actually by hanging that person out there, you're actually showing the failure of the whole thing. Okay, it's like, it's the failure of man to do the right thing when he or she were empowered to do the right thing. But it's also, it reflects on God. It's like there is this idea that by being ourselves ambassadors of the divine, every time we mess up, we are kind of presenting the wrong image of God. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like the opposite of it's the other side of the mirror. It's true that we were creating God's image, but that also means that what we do reflects on that image as well. Every time we take the wrong turn, it reflects bad on God. And so it's like, that is the affront. It's, in a way, it's like God's recognition that, something went very wrong. At the same time, it's part of free will. Okay, so now, this impaled body and the affront of God is connected to something that you all know. B'Tselem Elohim bara oto. When we read in the beginning of the book of Genesis that God created us in God's image, there was a question back in the chat regarding what does that mean? God doesn't have an image, right? We all, learn to that type of thing. But back in the times of the Bible, and certainly in the times of the Talmud, it's not so clear that God doesn't have an image. And there are certain texts, both in the Bible and in the Talmud, that actually they say that God has a pretty concrete image. And we were created on that image. And some of the things that we do today, halachically speaking, for example, burying somebody, forget about death penalty, but burying somebody as soon as possible, it's not, because when a person decomposes, that is also an affront to God, because we were created on God's image, or in God's image. So some of that is also behind how death penalty will be, how do you say, mandated in the Talmud. Okay, all of the, or 3 out of the 4 that we are about to speak about, try to maintain the physical integrity of the body. Okay, which you need to be creative. Yes, Rabbi.
And I apologize, I didn't have sound for about 8 minutes there or so, so this may have come up. It was hard for me to read lips this far away, but when it comes to the issue of, and I just think about impaling, I immediately think of Pinchas. When it comes to the issue of zealotry and evangelism is not the word I'm looking for, But, you know, that the notion that Pinchas was acting in the name of God, but in fact took lives. I mean, the rabbis don't, Pinchas is essentially sort of rewarded for his convictions. So, I mean, that.
It is an interesting tension. And again, it's like part of my goal for this class is that for everyone here to feel the tension, to understand that these are complicated subjects. Even if we have a strong stand against death penalty, or if some of you are in favor of death penalty, regardless, I want to take a step back and to feel the tensions. But with Pinchas, what was the reward that God gave Pinchas after the, you know, the impaling of the couple that was running wild in the middle of the camp?
Right.
Do you remember what's, you know, God?
Brit Shalom.
Correct, Brit Shalom, a covenant of peace, which is a very funny or not so funny type of reward. And so there are some rabbis that say that what Pinchas got is kind of a tranquilizer of sorts.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you are a bit of a zealot, thank you, but here you have your you know, it's how do you say, your shot of you know, this will calm you down like forever.
Right, so that he's not a perpetual vigilante. That was the word I was looking for.
And that I think also goes to play that we don't elevate or celebrate the death, right? That's not the purpose of the death penalty, is not to glorify the hanging or anything, just like we're not glorifying the zealotry in that same way. We need to deal with it and use it as if it has to be used. And then we go back to our customs, right? The way that we know is or we feel is right.
I think I remember the modern example of it that I always came back to was when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, and Yigal Zamir believed that God was commanding him, entreating him to take that life because of what Yitzhak Rabin represented. And the idea that any of us as human beings can ascertain and say that this is what God would want. God would want me to take this life, that we, not God, have the power to take life, to remove life. The Midrash doesn't read that we take Moses with a kiss. The Midrash reads that God takes Moses with a kiss. So I always use that example as, you know, you can say Pinchas was, you know, on the side of holiness, but what about somebody else who says, but God told me to do this too?
Yeah, again, it's like it's very clear that in I would say in the Jewish texts, taking somebody else's life, you know, just because you feel like doing that is not rewarded, and it's not something that gets it won't give you a whole lot of good points. At the same time, the text is complex enough to, for example, when David makes sure that Uriah is killed because he slept with Bathsheba, and then Bathsheba, married woman, gets to be pregnant and he cannot get away with it, he will end up killing Uriah, not himself, but orchestrating all of that, and that doesn't look very good, and the text doesn't defend David, but he doesn't get the capital punishment either. So text is complex, okay? And the point that I want to show in this context, beyond the moment of Yigal Amir or all those crazy folks that will take justice on their hands and do all sorts of outrageous things, is how the system, in this case, when we move or transition from the Bible to the Talmud, how the system will try to make sense out of the death penalty, both as a possibility, but also as something that we actually don't want to do, okay? And so, you know, this is what comes now, you know, Talmudic times. Now, you need to understand that even if the rabbis, or some rabbis, which would be better, do not like death penalty, according to the rules of the game, you cannot take those things to the, you cannot say like this doesn't exist or we are against, because if the Bible permits this, you cannot say this is wrong. You don't say the Bible is wrong. That doesn't happen in the way the game is played under traditional circumstances. So what do? There are a set of laws that you inherit from the Bible, and then you need to deal with them and to create something that I would like to call the meta halacha, so something that goes beyond the law, that is speaking about your values, okay? So before we get there, in the Talmud we have 4 different types of death penalty: stoning, burning, decapitation, and strangulation. Stoning, I will be very brief because I want to jump more to the values behind all the technicalities, but still, just for you to know, since we don't want to desecrate the body of the person, stoning is not putting somebody in the middle and you throw stones at that person. According to the Talmud, you go up, you take the person up to a, three floors up, and then you throw that person down to the floor that was a stony floor. Spoiler alert, it's not a nice thing, okay? Either or, you don't want to get stoned, period. But it's different. Burning is not the burning of the Inquisition. Burning was about opening the mouth of the guy who had to endure that punishment and throwing a coal that was burning inside. Nothing nice, okay? Again, we are talking about death penalty. So if you want the whatever, this is not the class for the nice and beautiful. And then decapitation and strangulation. Decapitation is, it's interesting that the Mishnah connects it to the way the Romans do it. And strangulation is just the asphyxiation, okay? Now, forget about any of this. Let's see what the rabbis have to say about death penalty, yes and or no. Text number 1, picking back the idea of the image of God that we were created, or the story of Cain and Abel. Famous text, one probably of the most famous texts in the whole Mishnah, made it very famous by the Schindler List movie. Therefore, Adam was created alone to teach you that with regard to anyone who destroys one soul. Some manuscripts include from the Jewish people, some manuscripts do not. And so that is why I put it in brackets. The verse ascribes him blame as if he destroyed the entire world. Anyone who sustains one soul, the verse ascribes him credit as if he sustained an entire world. So is this text in favor or against the death penalty as a value?
Against.
Against. Why?
Because you're saving the entire world by saving one person.
Okay, it is connected.
Generations.
Thank you, Rick. It is connected in the Mishnah to the story of Cain and Abel. If you remember, when Cain kills Abel, God says, "Dmei achicha tzoakim elai." The bloods of your brother are screaming. And this text asks, why the bloods? Dmei, damim. Why in plural? Because it's his blood and the blood of everyone who would be a descendant of that person. So when you kill somebody, you kill that somebody and whoever will come after. It's a whole universe, okay? And certainly, when you save somebody, you save not that person, but an entire universe with that person as well. Now, let's read this text and tell me what's going on here. Rabbi Lazar said, anyone who becomes merciful upon the cruel one will end up by being cruel to the merciful. It is written, but Saul had pity upon Agag and upon the best of the sheep and the cattle. And it is also written about Nob, the city of priests, and he smote Nob, the city of priests, with the edge of the sword. The text here, just as a context, and then we will go to what's going on and what is Rabbi Eleazar saying, is taking 2 stories of Saul, King Saul, In one, he forgives the King Agag, a descendant of the Amalekites, and the other, he kind of kills everyone in the city of Nob, where everyone was a priest. Is this text in favor or against death penalty, and why? What is this text pushing for? Anyone?
Should I?
Justice.
Go ahead, Rabbi.
Well, I heard justice from Mike. I think it's about restraint and about the way that death will affect the killer. The idea that we can become either immune to it or we can become thirsty for it, and we can change by the way that we treat others. That if it's easy for us to be cruel to someone, who is offensive, it's not so far for us to be cruel to someone else.
Yes, but again, it's like, what does it mean for everyone here? It's like anyone who is merciful upon the cruel will end up being cruel to the merciful. What is this text implying? Think about the values associated and how this should translate or not to the death penalty.
Well, I think what it's saying is wrongdoing needs to be punished. Otherwise, the rest of everybody else suffers in some way.
Correct. Anyone else?
Well, punish, certainly people who do, horrible things should be punished, but still, to me, we are human beings, we make mistakes, and to me, it's an unspeakable tragedy to put to death someone who is innocent.
I agree. It's like, go, Rabbi.
No, I mean, Paul, I don't disagree with you one bit. This particular text is so interesting to me because at least the way I read it, especially this first line, is that by ignoring or turning a blind eye to cruelty, we do a disservice to the rest of society. That those who in fact are walking the straight and narrow path and doing the best they can each day will end up ultimately suffering because we aren't doing what we're meant to be doing and taking the necessary steps to, and the death penalty may in fact not be the ultimate end here. But this, I could see how this text would be used in that way, that we must in fact exact justice or the rest of society suffers. If we're too merciful upon the cruel, then ultimately the merciful will suffer.
Correct, which is,
I'm not against punishment, certainly.
No, I know you're not. I happen to agree and think that way about the death penalty as well. So I was just agreeing.
I think that we all are in agreement with, probably, I actually don't know, but the point that, and I'm bringing these texts just to show you a different perspective and the tension that the rabbis are experiencing. Because the story that Rabbi Eleazar is quoting is the story God tells King Saul, you need to go and kill all the Amalekites. The Amalekites are like, the Amalek is like the big enemy of the Jewish people back in the times of the Bible. And Saul goes there and kills a bunch of people, but then he doesn't kill them all. So on that context in which Saul seems to be merciful and doesn't kill, for example, the king of the Amalekites, Rabbi Eleazar comes and says, because he was merciful upon the king of the Amalekites, who was a cruel human being, who came many generations after Agag, who is the famous descendant of, who is called the Agagi, the descendant of Agag. Who is that we just read the story a couple of weeks ago, 2 months ago? Aman. So Haman is described as Aman Agagi, the descendant of Agag. So this text is saying, you don't have to agree. I'm just bringing it to show you that the rabbis have a universe of thoughts. Even if the majority is against the death penalty, the point that Rabbi Eleazar is pushing is, by being merciful to Agag, we ended up with Haman. So it's fine to be merciful, just know that there is a price that we can pay. This is what he's saying. This is not all of Judaism. This is not the majority voice, but I think that he's making an important point that we shouldn't kind of discard quickly, okay? Now, a couple of more texts. See this story from the Talmud. And again, tell me what's going on here. And what the rabbi, so this is kind of not so much a story, but something that happened at some point, but also what's going on and the uses of death penalty. An incident occurred involving one who rode the horse on Shabbos during days of the Greeks, and they brought him to court and stoned him, not because he deserved that punishment, as riding a horse on Shabbat is forbidden only by rabbinic decree, but because the hour required it, as people had become lax in their observance of Shabbat, and therefore it became necessary to impose the severe punishment for a relatively minor offense. How do you react to this text? It's talking about even before the times of the rabbis, because it's in the times of the Greeks. The rabbis are not even in existence when the Greeks were around. But what's going on here? How or why is the death penalty being used?
Well, it becomes a product of the social historical moment that it's in, right? So this is the imperfect nature of a justice system that is conceived of and implemented by humans who are flawed and moment to moment and day to day, living amongst sort of the experiences and fluctuations of the time. So
again, it's like, I will take what you just said to what Renee just posted there. It's like, as a deterrent, there are two main reasons death penalty is played or used in back in the texts and even today. One is the deontological reason. It's like, we need to uproot the evil from our midst. But then the other is like a deterrent, which this is a very clear case of using death penalty to avoid people doing whatever, okay? Is this smart? No. Is this something that I would push for? No. We don't ride horses to go to Shabbos, but most of everyone will use a car, which is like a modern horse. So again, if we go with this text from Sanhedrin, the Jewish people will be extinct long ago. But I'm bringing this text to show you that here is not talking about evil. Here is talking about a deterrent to strengthen some practices that were not happening at the time. Is there a good reason? No. It still opens the conversation of the capital punishment in our days, and maybe we will hear more about this next week, as a deterrent for this, that, or whatever. Okay? Now, the backside of that is that it is a problem, because if you use it as a deterrent, you open the door to do all sorts of things, like, for example, killing somebody for riding a horse. Are you willing to do all those things to protect the system of laws? That is the philosophical question that this text is bringing. Okay? Couple of more texts. We have 15 minutes. Oh, yes,
one point before we start on that section. It says it's a rabbinical decree.
Yes.
When does man get to determine life and death compared to God? Isn't God the one determining life and death?
That's the point that the text is also making, because it's very clear that according to all, you don't get the death penalty by a rabbinic decree. If you transgress a rabbinic decree, you get all other punishments, but not death penalty. This is a very unusual, weird case. And this is the tzorech hasha'ah. It's like the hour needed it, which is interesting, because even when the rabbis would be against, by and large, the death penalty, they kind of create enough mechanisms that may allow for the death penalty in very specific circumstances. Okay, something like that. But it's it's like how do you say, the hour require it. It opens the door when there is something very specific. At the same time, complicated tool. Take a look at what Rabbi Tarfon is doing and tell me whether he is in favor or against death penalty. There were these people of the Galilee about whom a rumor emerged that they had killed someone. They came before Rabbi Tarfon and said to him, "Will the master hide us?" He said to them, "What should we do? If I do not hide you, your pursuers will seek you and kill you. If I do hide you, this too is problematic. As didn't the rabbis say with regard to this prohibition against listening to malicious speech, even though one should not accept the malicious speech as true, one is required to be concerned about the harm that might result from ignoring it. Therefore, you must go and hide yourselves somewhere else." So my question to you, is Rabbi Tarfon against or in favor of the death penalty? And how is this story adding anything to the tension? I feel the tension. Why is the tension that Rabbi Tarfon is feeling with these guys accused from killing somebody? Judy?
Well, I think he's, on one hand, he's saying that you shouldn't listen to gossip and you shouldn't, take that into consideration. But on the other hand, he's confused. I mean, he doesn't know whether these people did what they were supposed to have done. And he's afraid that they will be caught and killed. But yet he's not sure that that's something that should be done because he's not sure that they did it. So he won't hide them because of his uncertainty, and they really have to take care of themselves.
Correct.
He doesn't want to aid and abet, right?
Yeah.
So it's like he doesn't want to get involved. But it's like, and again, we have this uncertainty whether they did it or did not. Okay, and part of the uncertainty is, if you did it, I don't want to be the one who is hiding you. Okay, I'm not either the one that will give you to the authorities to be killed by the Romans. Okay, he doesn't want to get them killed, but at the same time, he doesn't want to take any ownership of whatever they have probably done or not. But there is a tension here. It's like, I'm not dying for you, but I won't help those who are pursuing you to get you killed. Do you see what's going on here? And, let me, almost the end, see this story, which is very interesting because in the death penalty, which is actually relevant for our context as well, there is one part of the conversation that is about Jews killing Jews. Like, what would happen if you, bring somebody to the Sanhedrin, to the Beit Din, to the rabbinic tribunal, and that person has to be killed, which is what the Torah speaks about. It is what the Talmud also speaks about. But here we have also a transition, because when we lost the authority to kill people, thank God, the question then was, can you help as a Jew the Roman authorities to kill somebody? How would you translate that today? Should you be part of a jury helping, the system to kill somebody? You're not killing that somebody. It's the American society or whatever. What would be your role there? Okay, so this story is a bit about that, and see what's going on with Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, proceeded to arrest thieves. So it looks like Rabbi Elazar had a job to the side that he will get thieves and bring them to Rome to be judged. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha sent Rabbi Elazar the following message: "You are vinegar, son of wine." It's a funny insult. What does it mean if you are accused to be vinegar, son of wine? What does it mean? What does it mean? You're vinegar, son of wine.
You came from good stock, but you're.
Yeah, you spoiled. You know, it's like it's too much time spent. You know, has passed, and so your father, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, famous guy, he's wine, he's good wine, and you are vinegar. Why are you doing this? You shouldn't be doing this. Until when will you inform on the nation of our God to be sentenced to execution by a Gentile king's court? Okay, enough. Stop sending Jews to be killed by the Romans. Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Shimon, sent a message back to him. I am merely eradicating thorns from the vineyard. See also, you know, the vineyard, vine, vinegar, all of this speaks to a very interesting told story. Okay, what does it mean? I am eradicating thorns from the vineyard. How do you understand the metaphor? You
Taking the bad apples out of the bunch.
There you go. Take the bad apples out of the, you know, using a different tree metaphor of our days.
There you go.
He says, you know what? I'm just taking the bad apples out of the tree. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha sent back to him, let the owner of the vineyard come and eradicate his own thorns. How do you understand? Who is the owner of the vineyard?
The Romans in this case.
Okay, so
Civil authority.
Could be the Romans. So let the Romans do the job of eradicating the thorns from the vineyard. But there is another reading.
You could say HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Could be God. So and between the different two readings, you have also different stakes on the death penalty. Because if you say let the Romans do the job, you may be saying let the Romans get the thieves and kill the thieves. But if you think that the thorns and the vineyard are actually from God, you are saying let God deal with the bad apples, okay, with the thorns, which would be blocking the whole idea of the death penalty. Wonderful thing about this story is that it is ambiguous enough, so it's not one or, you know, you don't know. It depends on how you read the story, which I love about the rabbinic texts. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha sent back to him, let the owner of the vineyard come and eradicate his own thorns. One day, a certain laundryman met Rabbi Eliezer and called him Vinegar, son of wine. So it looks like the nickname stuck. And so nobody, a laundryman, met Rabbi Eliezer and called him Vinegar, son of wine. Rabbi Eliezer said, from the fact that this man acted so insolently, one can conclude that he's a wicked person. So what did he do? He told the authorities, arrest that man. They arrested him and condemned him to death. Here we have a problem because Rabbi Eliezer is using the power of authority to get back at somebody who called him names. It's complicated, okay? After his mind settled, Rabbi Eliezer understands that what he did is wrong. He went after him to ransom him and save him from execution, but he was unable to do so. They already hanged him. Rabbi Eliezer stood beneath the gallows and wept. Do you see the tension here again? It's like, here we see a man who uses authority for all the wrong purposes and then gets profoundly, he repents. He repents. He doesn't want this. It's too late.
Is it a difference between sort of a theoretical principle and an actual impact on him? You know, in modern parlance, we might say he's woke now, right? In the past, it wasn't at his hands, it was indirect, but now he's the direct cause.
Correct. And now that it has become part of your personal story, now maybe, you switch the way you see at things. By the way, one of the things that, we have seen this in many contexts, but usually people who tend to have a very, nasty view of the other, usually that nasty view of the other is based on not knowing the other. It's when it is a theory, you can get, put whatever group you want is terrible. We should kill them all. Happens all around. Now, when you get, do you know anybody? Is that including children or the children's children or whatever? It's like, no, now that it's real, when we make the other a reality, we lower the, the amount of hatred that that type of xenophobia can create. Here in this case, yeah, Rabbi Lazar changes his mind once he sees the power of authority misplaced, when he is the guy who does. So yes, it's like, as Tina says, seeing the other as human. Okay, it's like, this is what happens. But in this case, it's too late. The Talmud will continue the story and will say that eventually, yes, the students came to console him, and they ended up showing that the guy who got executed was actually a wicked guy. But that is how the system protects the system. Okay.
Right. I mean, Rabbi, what you're speaking of, Brian Stevenson calls getting proximate, right? We are proximate with people, but it strikes me that it's just interesting because we do so much, and this is not so much about whether the death penalty is right or wrong, and it would be interesting to poll this group, but we do take significant steps in America to keep jails, prisons, penitentiaries, and the whole system of incarceration and the death penalty out of sight. So it is something that is really difficult to feel close to, or to know people, or to see up close that system at work. Many of us, it's not unlike, frankly, how infrequently we see people in service uniforms anymore, and how distant we are from living near military bases. So that's just one piece of it that keeps us in the theoretical, which is a lot easier to be, I think, quite severe in our assumptions and our judgments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But again, and that's, I think, at the center of why we are putting these two classes together. It's like, as we are coming to almost the end of it, the idea is, again, these are complex issues with lots of different ways of looking at them, with all different ways of pushing for this or for that or for whatever. And I think that the rabbis, in the vast majority, decided that taking somebody's life was something that they were not ready to do. But they made those assumptions after clashing with themselves and kind of struggling with themselves. And actually, that actually shows in, for example, this text. See what this text from the Mishnah says, almost the last text, and we'll be done close to one, I promise. A Sanhedrin, a rabbinic tribunal that executes 1 in 7 years, is called bloodthirsty. Hablani, it's like assassins, 1 in 7. To which Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah says, even 1 in 70 years. So if you kill 1 in 70, you are an assassin. It's like you are bloodthirsty. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, the same Rabbi Tarfon that didn't want to kind of hide the murderers, but didn't give them to the authorities, both of them would say, had we been in the Sanhedrin, no one would have ever been put to death. So if we were there, we would make sure that nobody would be there. And yet, against all of these texts, these 3 sentences, very against, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, very powerful rabbi at his time, then these sages would have created more murderers in Israel. Okay? This text is a bit of the what's going on in a nutshell. We have a majority of rabbis against, and yet some people pushing, for the reasons of what would happen if we are merciful to the cruel. Okay? And the last thing, because I will skip these two, but bringing back to what Paul said before, Maimonides, which is not in the rabbi, he lived 1,000 years ago, in his book on the commandments, reflecting on the negative commandment number 290, he says it would be better to acquit 1,000 criminals than to kill a single innocent, which is what Paul was saying before. It's like the risk of killing somebody who is innocent is too great of a risk that we shouldn't, by any circumstances do. Okay. At the same time, that which is a very powerful stand comes with a price. You may end up acquitting 1,000 criminals. Okay. And at least if this is what we are going to do, we need to be conscious about this. Okay. It's like, yes, I am with eyes wide open. This is what we are going to do. But this is not coming at no cost. Okay. Kitty, I don't understand your question. How do these sages relate in terms of time? It depends on the rabbi. You know, it's like the beautiful thing about rabbis is that you get all sorts of flavors. So some of them will be more liberal, some of them will be less liberal. And again, God willing, next week we will get more insight into some of that conversation. But again, what we wanted to show at this first class is that the Bible speaks about death penalty. The rabbis speak about the death penalty, but by and large, they are against. They don't feel comfortable with death penalty. They will create a whole system that becomes so bureaucratic that death penalty won't be possible to administer. But then there is a conversation that is not so much about how you make it happen or not happen, is why do you make it happen or not happen, okay? And again, that is part of an ongoing conversation that continues all through our days, and it's why we are having this conversation. Any final comments, questions, or whatever? If not, you can leave them for next week. That we hope to see you all, okay? Let me see. Are there any actual to execute? Yeah, it's like the Torah speaks about all sorts of executions, included people who are carrying sticks on Shabbat. So don't do it or whatever, but just don't tell any rabbi or whatever. How do the requirements for the death penalty differ before and after the commandments? It's like, yeah, all of that happens after the commandments in both cases, okay?
And we'll pick up from Maimonides and go more toward how we see it today with different streams of Judaism, and especially with the advent of science and the knowledge that we have now and how that impacts each of the movements and the understanding of their values versus the death penalty. So that's where we'll go next week.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you,
Rabbi. See you next week, God willing. In the meantime, stay healthy, stay safe.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.